Welcome back. Today's episode goes out to all those incredible people working so hard towards the extraordinary goals. I mean, I'm working too. But this is a piece of advice I learned a long time ago, which might help you too. The truth is, you need to quit being so hard on yourself. You really do. You don't need more pressure. You just need more trust. So take a nice deep breath. It's the kind of breath that calms your nervous system. Now I'm going to say something that might feel uncomfortable first. You really don't need to be so hard on yourself anymore. And if that one statement made you tense up, if your mind jumped to, but I'm not hard on myself. But if I'm not hard on myself, I'll get lazy. Good. That means this episode today is completely for you. Because the truth is, if you really believe you have to be hard on yourself to reach your goals, more than likely you're already incredibly disciplined and hardworking. You're already driven. You're absolutely already an extraordinary human being. But this pressure you're carrying, it's not proof of commitment. It's a strategy that you learned long ago. Back when you were starting. This is the time you need to pressure yourself. Because motivation doesn't come before action. Action comes first. And action is continuing through discipline. And action and discipline creates results and creates momentum. And when you have momentum, you're motivated. But today, I'd like to maybe dismantle that strategy a little bit. And it's not to make you weaker, but to finally let you perform at the level you were born for. You see, there's this quote out there that's so powerful and so important that if this speaks to you, write it down. The truth is, the strongest people are not those who carry the most weight, but those who know when to put it down. Because for extraordinary people, the hard thing is not the work. The hard thing is the recovery. The hard thing is dropping pressure. That's the hard thing. Now, there's this massive myth, and I don't know if it's spoken out loud, but it's implied. I need pressure to succeed. That's the myth. Somewhere along the way, you were taught this. This is the equation. Pressure equals progress. Pain equals growth. Harshness equals discipline. And the truth is, it probably worked really well. Well, it worked at one point. When you're building the habits, when your motivation was low, when you needed a spark, when you were down on your back in a ditch. And discipline is the thing that picked you up and got you out there. But nobody tells you this. The strategy that builds discipline is not the same strategy that sustains excellence. Hear that. The strategy that builds discipline is not the same strategy that sustains excellence. Extraordinary people don't break because they lack pressure. They break because they drowned in it. And pressure doesn't sharpen you forever. eventually it crushes you. And the cruel irony, you're applying pressure not because you're weak, but because you care so deeply. Because this is so important. Because this is why you're here. You're not weak. And you don't fear failure. You fear wasting your potential. You see, there's this thing. Every extraordinary athlete, every extraordinary person going into anything incredible, they need a certain amount of stress. Because the truth is, if we had absolutely no stress in this life, we would actually die. Stress is required for life. So not all stress is bad, right? If you're standing on the line of a race and you're not jacked up, a little bit in the sympathetic nervous system, then you probably won't perform the way you want. But if you're too deep in the sympathetic nervous system, it goes too far. So the understanding is you need a little bit of stress, but too much stress is going to be a problem. There's a quote, you don't whip a horse before the finish line. You steady it. So let's separate the difference between an extraordinary person and an unmotivated person. And let's get something very clear. Pressure can help you unmotivated. It's totally a great strategy if you're unmotivated because it creates urgency, creates movement. But the difference between an unmotivated person and an extraordinary person, extraordinary people are already moving. They don't need urgency. They're already going. They don't need someone yelling at them in their head at 5 a.m. Because guess what? They're already awake. They're already ready. Some of them are already out on the road running. See, what happens when you add pressure to somebody who already cares deeper is heightened cortisol levels, stress, tightness, overthinking, anxiety, racing pulse. And stress at that level does not improve your performance. It's going to interfere with it. And that's why our hardest workers often burn out first. Not because they aren't strong, but because they never learn to soften without stopping. And this has nothing to do with lowering standards. This is all about changing fuel sources. You see, you don't rise to the level of your pressure. You fall to the level of your self-trust. You know, there is a cost to living a life of constant self-pressure. So let's talk about what is this pressure quietly stealing from you? When you're under pressure, you're under stress, you're probably not in the present moment. And when you're not in the present moment, joy has a tough time finding you. Just being present. Pressure stops your presence. It interferes with your creativity, but most important, as an athlete or an extraordinary human being, it's going to interfere with your recovery. So what's recovery? Like, they used to say that injury was a result of overwork, like working the body too hard, working too much was what caused injury. But what they've realized is it's the human body and mind and everything is so capable of incredibly hard things. You can put any kind of load at it you want. But you have to match your recovery with your load. Because if there's an imbalance between your load and your recovery, that's where injury can come in. So now they believe that injury is actually a result of under-recover. And under-recover includes everything: eating, sleeping, resting. Because you see, you achieve something when you're under self-pressure all the time. And instead of celebrating, you just move the goalpost, you know? There's this quote: maybe you don't feel like you're doing so great because you keep on raising the bar. When you're under self-pressure, if you rest, you're feeling guilty the whole time you're resting. When you succeed, and you still feel like you haven't done enough. That's not discipline. That's survival mode dressed up as ambition. You see, if you want to have an incredible life as an extraordinary human being, you have to find a way, because a lot of this will help you move forward. But if you can't find a way to fully recover, if you can't find a way to take the small wins, then the ride won't be that great. I always say there's this thing called the competitive edge, and it's why extraordinary people are so extraordinary. Is because they're never satisfied. They're always pushing. They always want more. They rarely take time to cheer on their accomplishments. And the big problem is when they fail, they're devastated. I always say you want to keep that competitive edge, but you don't want to let it take you out on the bad days. And to really, really be lean into longevity and a great life in the things you love, you need to find a way to balance rest, guilt-free rest, to maximize recovery so you can get better. Because self-pressure, like I said, it's not discipline. It's survival mode dressed up as ambition. And survival mode cannot access your highest performance. It just can't. You're too deep in the sympathetic nervous system to really, really perform. Because your nervous system doesn't innovate when you're under attack. And it doesn't differentiate between the attack coming from outside or from inside. Listen to this. You don't need to prove your worth through suffering anymore. This is a powerful quote. Self-punishment is not a prerequisite for excellence. So hear this truth. You already do all the work. And sometimes we're afraid to admit this, but the truth is, you may not want to admit this, but you've never been someone who needed to be pushed. If this all resonates with you, you're not somebody who needs to be pushed. You already push yourself too hard. Look at your life. Look at every single thing you've survived. Look at what you continue to show up for, even when the results aren't coming. Don't you show up? And I'm not saying sometimes you don't show up, your face drenched in tears. You still show up. You show up in pain. You show up with frustration. You show up with fear. You just show up. You don't quit when things get hard, but you do get harder on yourself. And that really worked, right? Until it didn't. The most extraordinary people I know on this planet, you don't need more pressure. You need permission to trust yourself. Trust that you will show up. Trust that you will do the work. Trust that taking rest won't erase your edge. Because the truth is, and so many truths on this planet are so incredibly contra to popular opinion, or like they're contradictive. They don't seem to fit. But the truth is that rest won't erase your edge. That trust is your next level of discipline. And the truth is, when you start leaning into this, you're going to find yourself in a place I found myself recently where everything was getting really, really hard around me, in my head and everything. And then I remembered this incredibly powerful quote: just before you level up, just before you hit that next level, it's going to get really hard. And when it's getting really hard, it's not a sign of quit. It's time to quit or you're failing. It's a sign that you're almost to the next level. And the next level of discipline for you is trust. See, discipline begins with force, but mastery begins with trust. So how do we shift from force to trust? So I want you to close your eyes for a second and imagine that you're pursuing the exact same goals that you've been pursuing all the way along, but you're not using any self-violence. Imagine consistency without cruelty, without yelling at yourself in your head, without calling yourself down, imagine resting without saying you're lazy, you got to do more. Imagine excellence that feels grounded instead of frantic. This is what happens when pressure is replaced with alignment. You stop asking yourself, how do I push harder? And you start asking yourself the most important question at the level of mastery is, how do I support myself better? How do I recover better? How do I lean into all the things that will make me better? There comes a point when you have to shift from this so-called weakness to this very important intelligence. Because the truth is, performance will thrive in safety, and it's not going to thrive in fear. There's this quote: when your body feels safe, your mind becomes powerful. So as always, we're going to call this the inner advocate practice. And if you haven't gleaned this from other episodes, what I believe is we do have an inner critic, which is developed from the sympathetic nervous system as a way to deal with perceived threat. Sympathetic nervous system in ancient times, when we're chasing around dinosaurs, it was fight or flight. It was like, there's a real chance of dying here. You got to run or you've got to fight to survive. And as our brains got bigger, we needed a way to deal with like perceived threat. So the ego, sense of identity, or the inner critic was developed. And this is a super effective way of helping us make it through life back then, right? It's like one of the reasons this form of human, like biped, humanoid, one of the reasons our species survived on this planet, it wasn't because we were the strongest, because there was a lot stronger, similar bipeds. But it was because of two things. One, we were highly adaptable, but two, we had a hypervigilance to threat. And this is one of those things that, just like pressure, was a successful way of making it through life. But the problem is, when you have this inner critic always trying to hold you back to protect you from getting harmed, it's not effective because it's just trying to keep you small. So what you need to really work on, that next level, is called building an inner advocate. And where the inner critic is automatic, the inner advocate, if you ever think of it, like if you have that voice that says you're not good enough, or like maybe even worse, or it says you suck or you're useless or something like that, that's your inner critic if you hear that. And have you ever stopped for a second and went, that's not true, in your head? I can do this. I got this. That's your inner advocate, the one that fights the inner critic, the one that head on, the one that encourages, the inner voice that encourages. That is your inner advocate. And that's what this podcast is all about, building yourself an inner advocate. So here is a practice I want you to take with you. When you hear that negative or harsh voice, pause and ask, is this pressure or is this guidance? Pressure says you're not enough. Guidance says you're capable. Let's move forward. Let's go. I've seen this this young person on social media, and she's a comedian and a runner, and she's always like, come on, Tatamites, let's go. And I just imagine that I would love to see if she has an inner advocate, that she wakes up tired and it's like, I don't really want to run today. And then inside her head, it's let's go. And she's just taking that outside to share it with other people. If you want to be your own inner advocate, you got to replace punishment with precision. So you got to battle it straight on. You got to speak to yourself the way an elite coach would speak to elite performers, a good one. Firm, clear, respectful, encouraging. That's your inner advocate. The voice that leads you matters more than the force that drives you. And that's also the voice inside. Listen, I want you to understand, you were never broken. You were never lazy. You were never lacking. You're just using an old strategy on a new level of greatness. You don't need more pressure. You just need more trust. And the moment you give the trust, you start leaning into the trust, everything changes. That is your inner advocate. And today, let it speak. Be deliberate. The final quote of today: extraordinary people don't rise by force. They rise by believing in who they already are. Thanks for hanging out with me again today. Keep trusting and keep building your own inner advocate.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Inner Advocate, a podcast by Kimen Petersen, formerly Conversations with Kimen. If you found value in today's episode, please follow, like, and share the podcast with someone who you think may benefit from it. You can listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and connect on Instagram at your_inner_advocate. Until next time, keep listening to and developing your inner advocate.